President Joe Biden may have just given his most effective political messaging yet. Let's take a listen to that.
Over the next 10 days, we will reach two goals, two giant goals. The first is 100 million shots in people's arms will have been completed within the next 10 days, and 100 million checks in people's pockets in the next 100 days. Shots in arms and money in pockets.
Shots in arms and money in pockets. Democratic strategist Roger Fisk and Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard. They join us now to discuss this strategy, messaging, and what it means for our politics. Rachel, I got to tell you, I think that's probably the single most effective political slogan that I've heard in a long, long time. Now, how is the GOP going to be dealing with this? Because we saw that there was no real effort to mount opposition to the COVID relief package. There has been focus on, frankly, like pretty esoteric culture stuff, which I get in terms of base excitement, but not necessarily in terms of driving out votes or switching people's votes. How is the GOP going to counter, some of this in terms of their politics of the future? Because from my perspective, I think Biden is going to be dramatically popular once we've seen widespread both adoption of the vaccine and as everybody starts to get their stimulus check.
Well, I do think it's just popular messaging because it's also good. It's also reality good. And it's good. It's been a really long year. So I'm really, really grateful that we have these vaccines and that they're getting out the door, and that people are getting the support that they need. So I'm very happy that that's happening. Now, I will say this, it reminds me a little bit of, whether or not this can sustain itself, because Charles Murray, who is very, thoughtful person on the right, who's actually come out in support of UBI, always said, be careful when the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting bread and circuses. And so what I really think is going to be telling here is, look, you can give people, direct checks, although it hasn't always worked, because we've seen this in 2009. We saw Bush do it in 2001 and 2008. And the reason it's popular in the moment, but it doesn't actually sustain, is because people aren't stupid. The systemic power structures don't change. Right. They're still, losing their jobs, when they're, we're importing H-1Bs, from India to do it for them. They're still unable to, actually improve their station in life because we've concentrated corporate power, so extremely. So I do think, in the short term, this is extremely popular, and I'm also very grateful for it. But I don't think it's going to sustain itself in the long run unless there's actual real change. I don't know that the Republican Party is positioned to give it to anyone, but I don't know that Joe Biden is either.
That's an important point.
Rachel citing Charles Murray on this show, definitely trying to get us canceled. Thanks for that.
Not for anything IQ related.
Not for the bell curve.
To be clear.
Thanks for that, Rachel.
He who shall not be named.
I'm here,
Roger. What do you make of this messaging? Because I do think, and look, I got to give credit to Biden, too. He was the one that came up with the 2012 re-election, the Bin Laden's dead and GM is alive slogan. Also very effective. And I do think, look, the bar has been set incredibly low, but shots in arm and money in the bank is a pretty good line, pretty effective, and very, very highly tangible for people.
Yeah, I share Rachel's sentiment, and I'm a veteran of Senate staff as well. And my earliest instincts were always good policy makes for good politics, right? If you're elected by people in your district or your state, ostensibly because they support a certain kind of value system that you have and a certain kind of set of priorities that you say that you'll bring to elected office, and then you turn around and deliver that, then there's kind of a seamless kind of narrative arc between why you ran, what you're doing, and then how you can go back and present yourself to the voters. It's unusual that Democrats are able to kind of crystallize things so simply. And as we know, and also somewhat to relate this to the earlier subject, that, when the president then moves forward to other subjects, whether or not they can maintain this kind of level of concise messaging is to be determined. But for right now, especially with the reflective surface of the previous administration, this is competence, it's empathy, and it's delivering, and that's always gonna work well.
It's interesting, Roger, let me follow up on that because I'm curious. The Biden people seem to believe that Obama made a dramatic mistake by both going for Obamacare very early on with his administration, but not, quote unquote, like taking enough credit for the stimulus bill that he's passed. Biden's going to Pennsylvania. He's going to be barnstorming the country along with the vice president, touting the COVID relief bill. What do you make of that history? I mean, you served in that administration. Like, what do you think of their political calculus?
It is interesting, and I think we can put it in the bucket of kind of lessons learned, that you need to go out and ring that bell and try to communicate to people that there's a reason why when one of the parents walks through the door with a bag of groceries and a full tank of gas in the car, that relates to that headline that you saw in the newspaper that morning or what you're going to see on TV that evening. We can't just assume that, you do the right thing and that it just kind of emanates out there and people pick up on that and that credit lands where credit is due. So the idea of trying to make more of a clear connection between the policies, why he ran, what he said he would do last fall, and now approaching halfway of getting it done. I think it's smart because there's so much attention for people's clicks and their eyeballs as they live their lives online that we can't just assume that people are going to connect these things. And so I think the administration is very well served by taking a lesson from the Obama administration and trying to go out and drive home that connection, because it is competent public policy and they should get credit for it.
And Rachel, there is some emerging evidence that Biden is breaking through some of the sort of hardest partisan divisions. I saw this from Des Moines Register this morning in Iowa. State he lost by 8 points. Biden's favorability has climbed to 51%. That's from 43% back in September of 2020. On the other hand, historically, parties in power do really poorly in the midterms. So even though, the economy is probably going to come back, a lot of good indications there, even though the vaccine distribution is going pretty effectively, even though this is a good slogan, he still has, and the Democratic Party still has, a real uphill battle on their hands to maintain control of the Senate and to maintain control of the House.
This goes again to, in politics, everything is fleeting. And so I think sitting on your laurels and sitting back and saying, well, I'm getting shots in arms and checks in bank accounts, all these political victories are ephemeral. You got to keep working for it. And again, I think you do need to speak to these broader elements of the country that, and these broader elements of the systemic power structure that have put people back on their heels, because it's been COVID, but before that, it was a lot of other things that still remain unaddressed.
Yeah, really interesting, guys. All right. Thanks for joining us. Next on Rising, President of Center for Health and Democracy, former health insurance executive Wendell Potter. He joins us to discuss the Koch network. They've got a new healthcare proposal. That's when Rising continues.